Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we'll be recapping a wild day one of free agency for the Detroit Pistons, who they signed, and a potential trade that could really shake things up. Okay, so first things first, we had two signings within the first hour. Bringing back B-ball Paul Reed. The Pistons re-signed him on a 2-year deal, $11 million, $5.5 million annually. The second year, per Amari Sankofa of Detroit Free Press, is non-guaranteed. So essentially a 1-year deal with a non-guarantee on the second. I was a little surprised by this. I thought B-ball Paul was exceptional last year in his role, stepped up in the playoffs, stepped up in the regular season. I was more so just surprised because I thought the Pistons were looking at more stretch bigs and potentially maybe a real 7-footer type big as their third big behind Stu and JD, but obviously they really valued what B-ball Paul brought. I certainly don't have many issues at all with Paul Reed, the player. It was more so like the archetype of big I thought they might be looking at, but it is only day one of free agency. B-ball Paul is a very overqualified third big in the NBA, in my opinion. So whilst I was a little surprised, overall that is a deal I think most Pistons fans should be okay with, and I think B-ball Paul, particularly with some of the injury history Stu and JD have had with ankles and the like, I think B-ball Paul is excellent insurance for them. So whilst I was a little surprised after thinking about it, it's now probably, we're a good 7 or 8 hours removed from when that deal occurred. I think that's a solid signing, and I'm happy to have B-ball Paul back. So let me know your thoughts below on that one. And then this was the big signing of the day for the Pistons. A very controversial signing, a signing that I think, if you're paying attention the past 24 hours, was somewhat inevitable. The Pistons went out and signed Caris LeVert to a 2-year, $29 million deal. They essentially used the money they were going to allocate to Malik Beasley on Caris LeVert, $14.5 million per year. Only a 2-year deal, both guaranteed, no player or team options. My brief thoughts on Caris LeVert, we're going to have all summer to talk about his game in depth. Initially, I'll be honest, I was a little bit disappointed. I was very much keen on the idea of getting to kill Alexander Walker, but I don't think it was from a lack of trying. The Pistons didn't land Alexander Walker. I think it was, Shams reported it that Trae Young did his best to recruit Alexander Walker across to the Hawks, and ultimately they put off a sign and trade to land him. And the Hawks have had a really good free agency and offseason so far. But look, I wanted Alexander Walker. He's a younger, probably a bit better on defense, more reliable three-point shooter in his career, I want to say. But Caris LeVert, after now having some time to think about it, I think he really fills some voids that the Pistons had on their roster last year, particularly in the playoffs. He's an excellent shooter off the dribble, can create his own shot. From three, he shot 40% off the dribble. In the mid-range, he shot around 40%, which is a really good number in there. 50% on floaters. His playmaking, from people I've seen online, has gotten a lot better. 3 assists last year. So I think he's a guy that's going to fill a large chunk of what Dennis Schroder did for the Pistons last year, except he's 6'6" and is a solid defender. So I think he'll be a really good 3-and-D wing off the bench. I think that's the going rate for someone like him, is the mid-level exception. So I think this was a pretty good signing. Of course, this signing could look potentially worse maybe if the Pistons don't sign any more big-time shooters, because Caris is definitely, whilst I don't think teams will leave him open, he isn't a proven knockdown shooter to this point in his career. Even though he shot it really well last year, overall he's around 34% on his career. So, the Pistons without Beasley are missing a huge part of their three-point offense. So, if you try not to compare Caris LeVert to Beasley and more so look at him filling a lot of what Dennis Schroder did, I think you'll come to find this signing is a pretty good one. Obviously, LeVert doesn't bring the point guard and pure playmaking that I think Schroder has, but I think he can fill a fair bit of it, especially off the bench, and especially with Jaden Ivey coming back. I think they can fill a fair portion of that playmaking. And I think he brings some much needed size to the wing and to the backcourt. So, solid signing so far. It could look a lot better if the Pistons add some shooting. Could potentially look a little bit worse if they don't, but we'll see what happens. But after having some 4, 5, 6 hours to think about it, I think it's a solid signing. And play for the University of Michigan, so I know a lot of Piston fans will love that. So, um, that was the other big signing of the day. Now, before we wrap it up, I've mentioned Dennis Schroeder's name at least 4 times since we started recording. He's so Schroeder is going to the Kings. We know that much. On probably a 2-year, $30 million deal. What is holding this up right now, and the reason I've waited a bit longer to record this, is that it's been reported that the Pistons, there's an offer, a sign and trade on the table, Malik Monk, for Dennis Schroeder. And I'm not exactly sure what's holding it up. There's been some reports that the Pistons are looking to maybe add an extra team and make this a bigger deal, and reroute Malik Monk somewhere. So I think potentially that could be what's holding it up, because it sounds from more reports that that deal's on the table from the Kings. So because for the Kings, if they can send out Malik Monk, I believe it allows them to pay Schroeder a little bit more and then not use a mid-level on him and keep their mid-level to use on another player. And then I think for the Pistons, they are trying to make this a bigger deal to potentially go get a bigger salary player and reroute Monk somewhere else. So I think both sides are just trying to make sure before, well, the Pistons are trying to make sure before potentially that they commit to bring in Malik Monk that there's no other deals they can make with his salary. Which this is a good situation for the Pistons, because obviously we didn't want to just lose Schroeder for absolutely nothing. This allows you to get something back for him. And I think the Pistons are just trying to exhaust all avenues. Feels like on day one, the trade isn't happening, even though it heated up there for a couple of hours. But if it is, they do just get back Malik Monk. My brief thoughts on that are it's going to be quite crowded in the backcourt for the Pistons. They will essentially have Ivy, Cade, Malik Monk, and Caris LeVert all looking, we know how many minutes Cade's going to play, around 35. We know Ivy's at least 28 to 32, probably in that neighborhood. Then Monk and LeVert, I would imagine, would be looking at 20 to 25 minutes a night. So there's a lot of minutes there. And then you also have Ron and Asar, who need all the minutes at the 3. Because I don't think any of those 6 players I mentioned can play the 4. I think Ron's still a bit, he doesn't have the bulk. And then I think Asar in like spot minutes, I don't mind playing at the 4, but I think you lose a lot of his perimeter defense when you're leaving him at the 4 to either like stand in the corner or be in the paint. I just think you lose a little bit there. So I don't think he can play bulk minutes at the 4. So, but just Malik Monk, the player, I think this would be just another guy that can dribble, pass, shoot. He didn't shoot it well from 3 last year, but he's on volume a really good 3-point shooter. I believe throughout his career he can pull up, he can get into the paint, more athletic than you'd think, even though he's only 6'3", can drive, kick, playmaking's got a lot better. I think averaged 18 points last year. Definitely a guy that knows his role and would accept coming off the bench. So I think it'd be a really solid to good play to add. And if you could make it work with Cade, Ivy, LeVert, and Monk, whilst the spacing overall might not be perfect, I think, like I said, you have a lot of guys that can dribble, pass, shoot. And I think those guys are value, or I should say dribble, pass, create their shot, and potentially shoot it. But which I think is still valuable. I think the Thunder, whilst they have some really good spot-up shooters, they're a team that values guys that can dribble, pass, shoot. I think Monk, he's around 6'3", 6'4", maybe. So, him and LeVert aren't completely undersized or anything like that. So I think if you can make that rotation work minutes-wise, then I think there's a lot you can do there. Now, I think there also is, I do have to bring up, there could be questions about Jaden Ivey's fit. does this affect his extension if you're paying Monk, who's on like, I think he still has 2 or 3 years left on his deal at around 60 million. So you have a lot committed to him. You've got LeVert, 30 million committed to him. Of course, you can trade these guys, but you start to look at that Ivy extension and think, what's the plan there? But we'll see what happens. The trade's got to happen first, but it feels like the Pistons are going to get something back for Dennis Schroder, which I think is a win because we didn't want to lose him for nothing. But that's going to do it for today's show. By the time you're watching this, something could have happened, but hopefully you enjoyed this recap, and we'll be doing these for most of the first few days of free agency. So stick here, subscribe if you haven't already. Appreciate all the support. Go watch our live stream of the first couple hours of free agency. That was a heap of fun. But until next time, as always, go Pistons.